The classical definition of a still life is a work of art depicting inanimate, typically commonplace objects that are either natural, food or flowers, or man-made, books, glasses, or favorite possessions. In this exhibit, Significant Objects, The Spell of Still Life, we hope to examine the way in which these ostensibly mundane and insignificant subjects, portrayed in painting, sculpture, and works on paper, are indeed significant. Historically and critically, still life was considered in low regard. It was believed to be solely mimetic and imitative. This was because theorists and the academic system believed that the subject matter of art should be ennobling. This exhibit, however, posits that nothing could be further from the truth. Here is a genre in which artistic skill and fantasy are tantamount to success. Still life painters were as ambitious and imaginative as artists practicing any other genre, and they also realized the value of engaging the viewer and sustaining their interest in a work of art. The exhibit has been divided into 4 perspectives, with the goal of demonstrating still life's rich associational value to time, place, and circumstance. The first section is called Depiction and Desire, and we look at still life there as a barometer of wonder, an impulse to collect and to possess. In this image by Balthasar van der Ast, called Still Life with Fruits and Flowers, it's dated 1630, a 17th century viewer would have been delighted with the vivid display of motifs described with such care. The Chinese porcelain plate, heaped with a large variety of luscious fruit, was a highly valued accoutrement for a Dutch patrician home. The bouquet of flowers in a lovely thorn prunt beaker, only well-to-do households could afford bouquets of flowers like this. And the tulips in particular, and one notes there's only one tulip here, were expensive and had a very short growing season. Viewers who were interested in natural curiosities, such as insects and shells and crayfish, would have been delighted to see the arrange almost inventory-like across the bottom of the panel of all the varieties that van der Ast is depicting. The shells in particular, and there are 2 beautiful ones to the right, were a visual tribute, if you will, to the travel and scientific discoveries of the day. One has a sense of wealth and abundance, particularly if you owned this. You felt like you had the objects depicted in your possession. And in many cases, it must be said that the paintings were less expensive than the objects depicted in them. The section called Decoding the Still Life posits that beneath the beautiful surface of a depicted object, there lies an arrangement coded with meaning and symbolism. After the Reformation in the 16th century, there was a growing appetite for non-religious subject matter. And in Protestant Northern Europe, this coincided with the rise of the independent still life in the early 17th century. And so there are wonderful displays peppered with allusions to the fragility of life and the vanity of satisfying earthly desires. Jacques Linard's Five Senses, painted in 1639, evidences many of these concerns. Linard's painting is allegorical, and by that I mean where abstract and spiritual meanings are rendered by concrete or material objects. Here, each object is signifying a faculty. So if you look at the flower arrangement, they connote smell. Sight is indicated by the mirror to the left against the box. Taste accrues to the pomegranate, the lemon, and the cup of wine. You see an ivory flageolet or flute lying across a book, and that represents hearing. Touch, if you look at the top left, is indicated by the playing cards, the dice, and the shaker. Now, these emblematic qualities were not limited only to the senses in Linard's painting. Viewers of that time liked to puzzle out different meanings, and so they would have delighted in some of these additional ones that are resident in this painting. So, for example, if you look at the playing cards and the game and the music as an ensemble, those are considered transient pleasures. The flowers depicted in the precious Chinese bowl are ephemeral. The mirror is a frequent motif of vanitas in still lives, vanitas meaning the meaningless of earthly life. In Still Life Off the Table, we look at the genre from a very liberal point of view, looking at objects and works of art that may be still life related. Most of the objects in this section were created in the 20th century, and they carry the revered traditions of the genre in a very new direction. Frequently, they make use of non-traditional and unorthodox materials and motifs. Perhaps the signature object in this area is an assemblage by the artist George Herms, an American, born in 1935, and entitled The Librarian. The Librarian is a sculpture that dates to 1960, and by assemblage I mean a bringing together of a variety of motifs, in this case a wood box, papers, books, a loving cup, and a painted stool. Here found objects take the space of painted ones. The Librarian is created from cast-offs and assorted materials. The poetic and literary references that may be drawn from the specific books are secondary to the process of his creation, and it is an intuitive practice that draws deeply from within his own reservoir of personal experiences. This sculpture is an homage to a librarian in a small town in which he grew up. A fourth section in Significant Objects examines the display of skill and the mastery of technique that's necessary to create illusion and these arrangements of such imaginative, complex beauty. How do artists distinguish the transparency of glass? How do they demonstrate the downy, soft petals of a flower? The balance of light and dark, sharp and soft contours captured by a camera lens, and the chemistry of a darkroom. In this area, we're looking as much at presentation as we are at representation. In the 18th century, Chardin gave the still life a particularly French flair. We're looking now at two of his paintings. One is called Still Life with Cooking Utensils, and the other Still Life with Fowl. They are pendants, which means they were meant to be seen together, and they're dated around 1728 to 30. And the way he worked with still life anticipates a modern preoccupation, because Chardin was attempting to resolve the tension between depicting an object and making evident his craftsmanship to achieve that illusion. Denis Diderot, a perceptive and articulate art critic, noted these opposing features when he said, "Chardin's handling is all his own. It is an abrupt manner, close to you know not what it is, and the further you move away, the object assumes forms and ends by being that of nature. Sometimes it will please you equally as much near as from a distance." Perhaps what the critic was trying to identify was Chardin's skill in depicting motionless subjects on a painted surface with regard to their haptic qualities, and by haptic I mean the sense of touch. Materials and surfaces are very tactically and marvelously rendered. The soft lighting in which he envelops the objects subtly models them as it reveals almost infinite gradations of shade. At the same time, those surfaces seem to vibrate with a bit of the paint's fresh application. Faithful reproduction of the details was not Chardin's aim. It was the effect created by the picture as a whole. What I hope visitors will learn as they walk through Significant Objects, The Spell of the Still Life, is that the genre is both intellectual and emotional, that its messages can be nuanced, complicated, and varied. Fundamentally, still life can be a pretext for the act of painting, but it has a biographical component. It can reveal conscious and unconscious expressions and personal feelings and desires, all associated with the subject matter, and it can be a carrier of symbols. In addition, these are things that we live with day to day. They're things that we recognize that are familiar, and so it's something that we can engage with in a most fundamental aesthetic way.